Please raise your right hands. I, and state your name, do solemnly swear. I, and state your name, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies. Your right hands. I, and state your name, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Okay, so we need to talk about what just happened at an NFL game on November 9th, because this is one of those moments that's going to be replayed over and over and used as evidence by both sides for completely different reasons. Donald Trump showed up to the Washington Commanders versus Detroit Lions game, making him the first sitting president in nearly 50 years to attend a regular season NFL game. That's a big deal, right? That should be a moment of patriotic celebration. The president at a football game on Veterans Day weekend, reading the oath of enlistment to new military recruits, all very ceremonial and respectful and presidential, except that's not what happened. Not even close. What actually happened was Trump got booed loudly, sustained booing from thousands of people in the stadium. The kind of booing that you can't ignore or pretend didn't happen. The kind of booing that gets picked up on every microphone and shared across social media within minutes. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Foreign and domestic, I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. Congratulations. Congratulations.
And here's the thing that makes this so significant. This wasn't some protest rally or political event where you'd expect opposition. This was a football game. These were regular people who paid money to watch their team play. They weren't there for politics, they were there for sports. But when Trump's face appeared on the Jumbotron, the boos erupted, and they got so loud that they nearly drowned out Trump as he was trying to administer the oath to new military recruits. Think about that. He's doing a Veterans Day ceremony honoring people who are enlisting in the military, and the crowd is booing so loud you can barely hear him. That's not just awkward, that's humiliating. That's a public rejection on a massive scale in front of cameras and thousands of witnesses. Now social media did what social media does. It went absolutely nuclear. The video clips spread everywhere within hours. You had liberal accounts celebrating and saying America's had enough, and they're making it loud and clear. You had Governor Gavin Newsom posting the video with just a string of laughing emojis to troll Trump. You had political commentators on both sides weighing in with completely different interpretations of what this means. The left is saying this proves Trump is losing public support, and that even regular Americans at sporting events are turning against him. The right is saying this was a coordinated effort by liberals in attendance, and that it doesn't represent real America. Both sides are using the same video to make completely opposite points, and that's where we are as a country now. We can't even agree on what it means when a crowd boos. But let's be real for a second. This isn't the first time Trump has been booed at a major public event. He got booed at the US Open. He got booed at a Yankees game. There's a pattern here. When Trump appears at big cultural events with diverse crowds, he gets a negative reaction. Now you can interpret that different ways. Maybe it means his approval rating is terrible and most Americans don't like him. Or maybe it means that the kinds of people who attend events in major cities tend to be more liberal and don't represent the broader population. Both explanations probably have some truth to them. But what's undeniable is that these moments keep happening, and each time they happen, they get amplified on social media and turned into political ammunition. The MAGA response to this has been predictable, but interesting. Trump supporters are defending him by saying the boos were from a small section of the stadium and that most people were supportive. They're pointing out that he still went and did his duty reading the oath to military recruits despite the hostile reception. They're framing this as Trump being brave enough to show up even when he knows he might face criticism. And you know what? There's something to that. It does take a certain amount of courage or stubbornness or whatever you want to call it to keep showing up at public events when you know there's a good chance people are going to boo you. Most politicians would avoid situations like that. They stick to friendly crowds and controlled environments. But Trump keeps putting himself out there. Whether that's admirable or foolish depends on your perspective. The fact that this happened during a Veterans Day ceremony adds another layer of complication to the whole situation. You've got Trump honoring military service members and people are booing. Now the question becomes, are people booing Trump the person or are they disrespecting the ceremony? Trump supporters are absolutely making that argument. They're saying that booing during a military oath ceremony is disrespectful to the troops, regardless of how you feel about Trump. And again, there's something to that argument. There's a time and place for political protest, and maybe drowning out a military ceremony isn't the best look, even if you really don't like the president. But Trump critics would say that Trump himself has been disrespectful to the military in the past, with various comments and actions, so they don't feel bad about booing him during a military event. It's all very messy, and everyone thinks they're right, and nobody's changing their mind. The viral nature of this moment is what really amplifies its impact. Within hours, the video had millions of views, politicians were sharing it, news outlets were covering it, memes were being created, commentary was flying from all directions, and that's the world we live in now. A single moment at a football game becomes a national story because it gets captured on video and spread instantly across the internet. Trump has lived in this reality for years. Everything he does gets recorded and analyzed and turned into content. But that doesn't make it any less significant when moments like this happen because they do shape public perception, whether we like it or not. Alright, so let's dig into what's really happening here because this NFL game incident is part of a much bigger story about Trump's relationship with public opinion, his strategy for handling criticism, and what all of this means for his political future. First, we need to understand the context of Trump attending this game. Like I said, he's the first sitting president to attend a regular season NFL game in nearly 50 years. That's a significant drought, and there are reasons for that. Presidents generally avoid situations where they might face public hostility. They stick to controlled environments where the crowd is friendly or at least neutral. They don't put themselves in positions where they could be embarrassed on national television. But Trump operates differently. He's always been willing to take risks that other politicians wouldn't take. Sometimes that works in his favor. Sometimes it blows up in his face. This was one of those times when it blew up. The Washington, D.C. area is not Trump country. That's just demographic reality. D.C. itself voted overwhelmingly against Trump. The surrounding suburbs lean liberal. So attending a game in that market was always going to be risky. Trump and his team had to know there was a good chance he'd face a negative reception, but they decided to do it anyway. Maybe they thought the Veterans Day angle would provide enough cover. Maybe they thought the positives of being the first president at an NFL game in decades would outweigh the negatives. Maybe they just didn't care about the possibility of getting booed because Trump's whole brand is about not backing down. Whatever the calculation was, it didn't work out the way they probably hoped. Now let's talk about the booing itself, because it's important to understand what was actually happening in that stadium. According to the reporting, the boos were loud and sustained. They weren't just a few people heckling. This was thousands of people making their feelings known. The noise was intense enough to nearly drown out Trump reading the oath of enlistment. That's not a small thing. That's a significant portion of the crowd actively expressing disapproval. Now Trump supporters will point out that there were also cheers, and that's true. There were people supporting him as well, but the boos were loud enough to dominate the audio. And that's what matters in terms of how the moment comes across on video and in news coverage. The fact that this happened while Trump was reading the military oath adds a whole other dimension to the controversy. The oath of enlistment is serious. It's the moment when people commit to serving their country and potentially putting their lives on the line. Having that moment interrupted by political booing is not great, regardless of how you feel about Trump. The new recruits taking the oath shouldn't have to deal with that kind of chaos during what should be a solemn ceremony. So in some ways, the crowd's behavior was problematic. Even if their frustration with Trump is understandable, there's a legitimate argument to be made that political protests should not interfere with military ceremonies. But there's also an argument that Trump chose to insert himself into a public event and therefore had to accept the consequences of that choice, including potential negative reactions. The social media response to this incident has been absolutely wild, and it really shows how divided we are as a country. Governor Gavin Newsom posting the video with just laughing emojis is peak political trolling. Newsom is positioning himself as a major Trump critic and potential presidential candidate, so for him, this is perfect content. It makes Trump look weak and unpopular. It gets shared widely by people who already don't like Trump. And it costs Newsom nothing, because his base loves seeing him go after Trump. But it also further polarizes the situation. Instead of any kind of productive political discourse, we just get mocking and ridicule. And while that might feel good to people who dislike Trump, it doesn't actually accomplish anything in terms of policy or governance. On the flip side, MAGA influencers and Trump supporters are using this as evidence that the establishment and the media are out to get him. They're framing the booing as an organized attack by liberals who can't accept that Trump is president. They're saying this shows how desperate his opponents are. They're turning what looks like a humiliating moment into a rallying cry about standing strong against adversity. And that narrative resonates with Trump's base, who see him as constantly under attack from elites in the mainstream media. So in a weird way, the booing might actually strengthen support among his core followers, even as it looks bad to everyone else. This pattern of Trump getting booed at major sporting events is worth examining more closely. The US Open incident, the Yankees game, now the NFL game. These aren't political rallies. These are cultural events where regular Americans go for entertainment. And the fact that Trump consistently faces negative reactions at these events suggests something about his standing with the broader public beyond just his political base. Sports crowds are generally pretty diverse. You've got people from all political backgrounds. And when a significant portion of those crowds boos the president, that's meaningful data about public sentiment. It suggests that outside of his core supporters, Trump faces significant disapproval among regular Americans who aren't necessarily politically engaged, but who have formed an opinion about him based on what they've seen and heard. Now, Trump supporters would argue that these events are in liberal cities, so of course he gets booed. DC, New York, these are not Trump strongholds. If he went to a football game in Alabama or Texas, the reception would probably be very different. And that's true. Geography matters. But the fact that he can't go to major cultural events in significant American cities without facing hostility is still politically relevant. These cities have large populations. They influence national culture and conversation. And if Trump is persona non grata in these places, that limits his ability to reach beyond his base and build broader support. The timing of this incident also matters. We're heading into another election cycle. Trump's political opponents are looking for any sign of weakness or declining support. Viral moments like this NFL game booing become talking points. They become evidence that Trump is losing ground. They get used in attack ads and campaign messaging. Whether or not the booing actually reflects a meaningful shift in public opinion, it creates a narrative about Trump being unpopular and embattled, and narratives matter in politics. People's perceptions shape reality. If enough voters start to believe that Trump is widely disliked and humiliated at public events, that belief itself can become a political liability. There's also the question of how Trump personally handles these moments of public rejection. We know from past behavior that Trump is extremely sensitive to criticism. He obsesses over crowd sizes. He attacks anyone who suggests he's unpopular. He demands loyalty and positive coverage. So being booed by thousands of people at a nationally televised event has to sting. It has to bother him, even if he doesn't admit it publicly. And when Trump feels attacked or humiliated, he tends to lash out. He goes on the offensive. He attacks his critics and doubles down on his rhetoric. So we might see him become even more aggressive and combative in response to this incident, which could either energize his base or further alienate moderate voters, depending on how it plays out. The media coverage of this event is also revealing. Liberal outlets are playing up the booing as a major humiliation. Conservative outlets are downplaying it or reframing it as proof of liberal hostility. And mainstream outlets are somewhere in the middle, trying to report what happened while acknowledging the political implications. But everyone is covering it because it's viral and it's visual and it fits into existing narratives about Trump. That's how modern political media works. Moments that can be captured on video and shared on social media become major stories, even if their actual political significance is debatable. We're in an age where perception and optics matter as much or more than substance. And Trump getting booed at an NFL game is bad optics, regardless of the underlying political realities. What's also interesting is how this plays into the broader culture war dynamics. Trump and conservatives have been fighting with the NFL for years over anthem protests and player activism and various other issues. Trump famously called for NFL players who knelt during the anthem to be fired. He's positioned himself as defending patriotism and the flag against what he sees as disrespectful liberal athletes. So there's a certain irony in him getting booed at an NFL game during a military ceremony. His critics are pointing out that hypocrisy. Trump wrapped himself in the flag and military imagery, but then gets rejected by a crowd at a football game during a Veterans Day event. It's a complicated cultural moment that reflects all the tensions and contradictions in American politics right now. Looking at the bigger picture, this NFL incident is one data point in a larger pattern. Trump is a deeply polarizing figure. He has passionate supporters who love him, and he has passionate opponents who despise him. There's very little middle ground. That polarization shows up everywhere he goes. At political rallies, he gets massive cheers. At cultural events in liberal areas, he gets massive boos. And both reactions are real. Both reflect genuine feelings that significant numbers of Americans have. The question for Trump's political future is whether he can expand beyond his base or whether he's destined to be forever trapped in this dynamic where half the country adores him and half the country can't stand him. Based on incidents like this NFL game booing, it seems like the polarization is as intense as ever and maybe even getting worse. So let's break down what this all means going forward and what we should be watching for in terms of political implications and Trump's strategy. First, there's the immediate question of how Trump and his team respond to this incident. Do they acknowledge it and try to spin it? Do they ignore it and hope it fades from the news cycle? Do they attack the people who booed and turn it into another culture war fight? Based on Trump's past behavior, he's probably not going to just let this go. He's going to say something. He's going to defend himself. He's going to frame the booing as evidence of liberal hostility or media bias or whatever narrative fits his purposes. And his supporters will amplify that message and use it as motivation to fight even harder for him. But here's the thing. No matter how Trump spins this, the video exists. Millions of people have seen it. It's going to be used against him by his opponents. It's going to show up in campaign ads. It's going to be referenced in debates and speeches. You can't unring that bell. The image of Trump being loudly booed at an NFL game during a military ceremony is now part of the public record. And for voters who are on the fence about Trump or who have concerns about his popularity, this moment might reinforce those doubts. It might make them question whether he's really as strong and beloved as his supporters claim. And in close elections, those marginal voters can make all the difference. From a strategic standpoint, Trump has to decide whether to keep attending these kinds of public events where there's a risk of negative reactions. The safe play would be to stick to friendly venues, rallies in red states, appearances at conservative conferences, events where the crowd is pre-screened and supportive. But that's not Trump's style. He's built his brand on being fearless and confrontational. He's not going to hide from hostile crowds because that would look weak. So we'll probably see him continue to show up at public events knowing he might get booed. And each time it happens, we'll go through this same cycle of viral videos and political commentary and competing narratives. The impact on Trump's political standing is hard to measure precisely, but it's definitely not helping him. Public booing at major events creates an impression of unpopularity. It suggests that even outside of political context, regular Americans don't like him. And while Trump's base won't be swayed by that, the broader public might be. Independent voters, moderate Republicans, people who aren't paying super close attention to politics, they see these viral moments and they form opinions. They think, wow, a lot of people really don't like this guy. Maybe there's a reason for that. And those impressions add up over time. They create a general sense that Trump is controversial and divisive in ways that make him a risky choice for leadership. For Democrats and Trump's political opponents, this NFL incident is a gift. It's perfect content for their messaging. They can point to it as evidence that Trump has lost the support of regular Americans. They can use it to argue that he's too polarizing to be effective. They can frame it as a sign that the country is ready to move on from Trump, and they don't even have to exaggerate or spin it. The video speaks for itself. Thousands of people booing the president at a football game. That's powerful imagery that reinforces negative perceptions of Trump. Democratic strategists are definitely taking notes and figuring out how to incorporate this into their campaign messaging. The military angle to this story also deserves more attention. Trump has always positioned himself as pro-military and supportive of veterans. That's been a key part of his political brand. He criticizes Democrats for supposedly not caring about the troops. He promises to rebuild the military and honor service members. But then he gets booed while reading the oath of enlistment to new recruits during a Veterans Day ceremony. That's not a good look. It creates cognitive dissonance. How can he be the military's biggest champion if he can't even get through a military ceremony without being heckled? Now Trump supporters will argue that the booing wasn't about the military, it was about politics. And that's probably true, but the optics are still bad. It muddies his pro-military message and gives opponents an opening to question his actual standing with service members and veterans. Looking at the broader media landscape, this incident is a perfect example of how modern political media works. Something happens at a public event, it gets captured on video, the video goes viral on social media, news outlets pick it up and cover it. Politicians and commentators weigh in with their takes. The story gets amplified across multiple platforms. and within 24 hours, millions of people have seen it and formed opinions about it. That's the information ecosystem we live in now. Everything is fast and visual and driven by social media virality. And Trump is both a master of this system and a victim of it. He knows how to use media and create viral moments when they work in his favor, but he also gets burned by viral moments when they make him look bad. The NFL booing is definitely in the second category. The comparison to previous booing incidents is instructive. Each time Trump gets booed at a major public event, it reinforces a narrative about his unpopularity outside his base. One incident could be a fluke or an anomaly, but multiple incidents over time create a pattern, and patterns are what people remember and what shape overall perceptions. So even if each individual booing incident doesn't matter that much, the cumulative effect of multiple incidents does matter. It creates this sense that Trump is widely disliked and that showing up to public events where he might face criticism is always going to be risky for him. For Trump's presidency, this kind of public humiliation creates challenges for governing and maintaining authority. Presidents derive power partly from public perception and respect. When a president is widely mocked and jeered, it undermines their ability to lead effectively. It makes it harder to command respect from foreign leaders. It makes it harder to rally public support for policy initiatives. It makes it harder to project strength and confidence. Now, Trump has never cared much about traditional presidential dignity or decorum, so maybe this doesn't bother him the way it would bother other politicians, but it still matters in terms of practical governing because public approval affects your political capital and your ability to get things done. The polarization that this incident reveals is also worth discussing. We're at a point as a country where people can't even attend a football game without making political statements. When the president's face appears on the screen, some people cheer and some people boo, and everyone immediately interprets it through their political lens. There's no neutral space anymore. Everything is political. Everything is tribal, and that's exhausting and corrosive to civic life. We should be able to come together for sports and entertainment and share cultural experiences without it turning into political warfare. But we can't. We're too divided. We're too angry. We're too convinced that the other side is evil and must be opposed at every turn. And incidents like this, NFL booing, are both a symptom of that division and a cause of more division. What should Trump do differently going forward? Well, if he wants to avoid these kinds of embarrassing moments, he could be more selective about which public events he attends. He could focus on venues where he knows he'll be well received. He could avoid liberal cities and stick to conservative areas, but that would mean retreating into a bubble, which isn't great for a president who's supposed to represent all Americans. The better approach would be to try to rebuild some broader appeal so that he doesn't face such hostile reactions everywhere he goes outside his base, but that would require changing his political strategy and his rhetoric, which seems unlikely. Trump is who he is. He's not going to suddenly become a unifying figure, so these awkward moments are probably going to keep happening. For the rest of us watching all of this, the NFL incident is a reminder of how broken our political culture has become. We can't even agree on what it means when a crowd boos. We can't find common ground or share understanding. We just retreat to our corners and use whatever happens to confirm our pre-existing beliefs. That's not healthy for democracy. That's not sustainable long term. At some point, we need to find ways to lower the temperature and remember that we're all Americans with more in common than what divides us. But that's not going to happen during this news cycle or probably anytime soon. So we'll just keep having these viral moments of political conflict and we'll keep arguing about what they mean, and nothing will really change except maybe things will get a little bit worse. The bottom line is this: Trump got booed loudly at an NFL game and it looked bad. His opponents are celebrating, his supporters are defending him, the video is everywhere, and we're all going to argue about it until the next controversy comes along and gives us something else to fight about. That's American politics in 2025. That's where we are, and whether Trump can recover from moments like this or whether they'll accumulate and drag him down is the big question heading into the next election cycle.